When Donald Trump told Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to know your place during a live congressional hearing, the room did not gasp, it froze. Then came a silence so deep you could hear paper stop rustling. What followed was not an outburst or a meltdown. It was something far more unsettling for those used to power, a calm, surgical dismantling that shifted the entire atmosphere. Before we dive deeper into the story, subscribe to the channel so you never miss powerful and thought-provoking stories. Let's go in deep. It was a late Thursday afternoon inside the House Oversight Committee. The hearing on federal accountability had dragged into its fifth hour, but tension still buzzed in the air like static before a storm. Every journalist in the room kept their phone charged and recording. Everyone sensed it, something big was about to happen. Trump, sitting at the center witness table, was dressed in his trademark navy suit and crimson tie, appearing unfazed. He leaned back with his arms casually draped along the armrests, confident, condescending, and clearly irritated by the persistent questioning. Jasmine Crockett, sharply dressed in a cobalt blue blazer and black-rimmed glasses, did not hesitate. Her questions came clipped, surgical, loaded with documented inconsistencies and foreign asset disclosures that the former president had previously dodged. "Mr. Trump," she said evenly, eyes never leaving his, "can you explain the valuation discrepancy between your 2019 and 2020 disclosures of overseas properties in Dubai and the Philippines?" Trump smirked. He tilted his head back and said into the mic as if it were an afterthought, "You need to watch your tone. Know your place, young lady." It was not just what he said, it was how he said it. Dismissive. Egotistical. Delivered like a man who had spent his life believing women, especially black women, owed him silence. The words sucked the air out of the room. Some representatives blinked. Some aides stopped typing. Expand's live stream chat blew up. But Jasmine Crockett? She did not blink. She adjusted her mic again, slowly as if giving the moment time to land. Then she leaned forward just slightly and said, with the poise of someone raised in courtrooms and community halls alike, "Mr. Trump, I know exactly where I stand. I stand on the Constitution. I stand on the trust of the people who elected me. I stand in this chamber because I earned my seat. And I stand here today not to be dismissed, but to be answered. If that threatens your comfort, perhaps it is your seat that is out of place." A hush fell over the chamber. The tension did not break, it deepened. A slow, still shift in the air that told everyone watching. Something important just happened. Not a media moment. A cultural moment. The chairman did not immediately gavel. He just sat still as if absorbing what had been said. Trump's smile faltered. His usual confidence seemed to pull back slightly like a tide. Outside the room, journalists broke the story instantly. Within 15 minutes, clips flooded Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. #KnowYourPlace trended globally within the hour, but not as a defense of Trump. It became a rallying cry. At a cafe in New Orleans, a woman clutched her coffee tighter and whispered to a stranger, "That was for all of us." At a dorm in Berkeley, students added subtitles to the clip and projected it onto a classroom wall. The video reached 3 million views by dinner time. On cable news, it was the lead story on every channel. But in Crockett's office, there was no victory lap. Her chief of staff, Kiara Owens, watched silently as requests for interviews flooded in. "They want a quote," she said, glancing up. "They want a soundbite." Crockett simply nodded and said, "Give them the facts." Because this was not just another viral moment. This was the product of years of silence, study, and steel. Crockett had started her career in public defense, fighting for clients in cases other attorneys would not touch. Wrongful evictions, false arrests, racial bias suits. She earned her reputation through sweat, not spotlight. In the Texas State House, she had already clashed with high-dollar lobbyists and quietly killed bills that would have endangered protesters' rights. She did it all without raising her voice. Her power had never been in yelling. It was in never flinching. So when Trump threw a phrase like, "Know your place," across the table like a verbal dart, it bounced right off. Because Jasmine Crockett was not there to play a part in someone else's story. She was there to rewrite the rules. In homes across America, people played the clip for their children. A retired judge in Atlanta called her granddaughter and said, "This is why we teach poise." At a bus stop in Cleveland, a mother pulled up the clip and whispered, "Remember this when they try to silence you." Meanwhile, on right-wing media, damage control began. "She's making it about race," one anchor groaned. "It's just old-school talk," another said. Harmless. But it did not land. Because this time people saw what it meant. It was not about volume or confrontation. It was about posture. Integrity. and the power of refusing to shrink. By nightfall, even late-night comedy hosts weighed in. One joked, "Trump told a congresswoman to know her place. Turns out she did. And it's right at the head of the table." Still, Crockett did not speak publicly again that day. No post-hearing press tour. No fiery tweets. She quietly left the chamber with her folder tucked under her arm and a nod to her staff. "Do you want to respond tomorrow?" Kiera asked. "No need," she said. "The country already did. Because when a moment is true, it does not need echo, it creates its own." And that was just the beginning. The morning after the hearing felt different, not just in Washington but across the entire country. Before the sun had even broken the skyline, the soundbites had made their way into local breakfast conversations, onto commuter radios, and through thousands of cracked phone screens as Americans tapped and replayed the moment again and again. But inside Capitol Hill, something more telling was unfolding, something quieter. Representative Jasmine Crockett arrived at her office just after 7:30 a.m., carrying a single reusable coffee cup and a leather-bound folder. No entourage, no fanfare. Her team, already fielding press inquiries from the New York Times to Al Jazeera, looked up from their screens in near unison. "They're calling it a defining moment," said Kiera, her chief of staff, holding up her phone, where a cable news cheer-in blared, "Know your place, sparks national debate." Jasmine gave a nod, unscrewed her coffee lid and said simply, "Then we better define it." She sat at her desk, not to bask in attention, but to prepare for another hearing scheduled for later that afternoon. The viral clip may have vaulted her into the national spotlight, but Crockett was still focused on policy. That morning, she had a stack of budget allocation reports to review and an education subcommittee meeting to prepare for. But behind the quiet of her methodical work was the roar of a country still trying to digest what had happened. In living rooms and lecture halls, news anchors and university deans discussed the exchange. Was it merely an instance of political rudeness? Or a watershed moment in the discourse on gender, race, and power? Meanwhile, former President Trump, hunkered down in a private suite at Mar-a-Lago, watched replays of the clip in frustration. "It was nothing," he barked at his aides. "She's twisting it. They all are." But even he knew this was different. It was not just about what he said. It was about how she responded, and how the world had paused to listen. By mid-morning, Representative Crockett's office released a written statement. It was short, just 3 sentences. "Yesterday's hearing was about accountability and transparency, principles I will always stand for. Disrespect is not new to women in power, but neither is resilience. I will continue to ask the questions that deserve answers. No fiery rebuttal. No name-calling. Just clarity and conviction." And it landed like thunder. Across social media, the hashtag #StandWithCrockett began trending alongside #KnowYourPlace. Civil rights groups released statements of support. Actress Viola Davis tweeted, "That is how you lead, with grace and steel." In schools, teachers paused lessons to talk about it. In corporations, DEI officers referenced it during internal workshops. Something real had cracked open, and Jasmine Crockett was at the center of it. But back inside the Capitol, not everyone was cheering. A private meeting was called between GOP leadership and legal counsel to discuss possible procedural consequences. "She was too aggressive," one aide was overheard saying. "We need to control the narrative." Control was slipping fast. Later that day, as Crockett entered the budgetary review chamber, a Republican colleague approached her with a strained smile. "Quite a performance yesterday," he said, half joking. Jasmine turned, looked him in the eye and replied, "That was not a performance. That was policy enforcement." He blinked and walked away. The rest of the hearing moved like any other. Questions, answers, bureaucratic tap dancing. But the atmosphere was different. Every time Crockett opened her folder, heads turned. Every sentence she uttered seemed to carry more weight. She did not act like someone who had gone viral. She acted like someone who had been preparing her entire life for this wait. The press began calling it the Crockett effect. That evening, she finally agreed to one interview, an extended sit-down with NPR's All Things Considered. When asked if she was surprised by the reaction, she said, "I am not surprised people recognize the moment. I am surprised they expected me to be surprised by it. This is not new for us. We are just finally being heard." And then came the moment that redefined the coverage again. When the interviewer asked if she had a message for young women watching her, Crockett replied, "Know your place. Let me redefine it for you. Your place is wherever truth is needed. Your place is at the mic, at the table, on the ballot, in the courtroom. Your place is everywhere they told you you did not belong. The interview clip hit social media within minutes. It reached over 5 million views in the first hour. By Friday morning, t-shirts were being printed with her quote. Protest signs were prepped. Panels on The View, CNN, and even Fox News dissected every word. But inside Crockett's office, she was already drafting new legislation, focusing on transparency in federal contracts, her original mission before the viral exchange. She's not chasing the moment, Kiera said to another staffer. She's expanding it. Meanwhile, opposition media tried spinning the event. A conservative commentator wrote a think piece titled, "The Overreaction to a Throwaway Line." But the public response was swift. Throwaway to whom? In Kansas City, a retired nurse sent Crockett a handwritten note. "I was told to stay in my place, during every job I ever had. Thank you for saying what I never could." And in Brooklyn, a group of high school students launched a TikTok campaign to teach others about microaggressions using the clip as an example. Back in D.C., Representative Crockett was asked if she would consider leading the next ethics reform hearing. She paused and then answered with a quiet certainty. "If I am needed, I will be there. That is my place." As the week closed, a final headline from the Washington Post summed it up best. Crockett did not just clap back. She called the room to order, and the country answered. And yet, even with the firestorm still burning around her, Jasmine Crockett remained focused on the one thing that had started it all: accountability. Her work, her questions, her unwavering calm in the face of disrespect. Because for her, this was never about being viral. It was about being visible. And now, everyone was watching. It started as a low hum, the kind of subtle energy shift that you cannot explain but everyone feels. The Capitol corridors buzzed with something more than routine. Staffers glanced up from coffee cups. Senators who normally brushed past each other paused to exchange tight-lipped nods. The moment had moved beyond politics. It was now something cultural. Something seismic. Outside, the media frenzy had hit its peak. Every network, podcast, and digital platform had something to say about the moment when Donald Trump told Representative Jasmine Crockett to know your place. But more importantly, they were talking about how she responded, with the kind of calm fire that rewires narratives. At a packed auditorium at Howard University, a professor projected the clip onto a lecture hall screen. "Watch her body language," he told his students. "Watch how she pauses, how she stays steady. This is not just a response, it is a masterclass." In the House Oversight Committee, however, there was tension. Whispers of disciplinary action had floated overnight. A small but vocal group of representatives questioned whether Crockett had violated decorum. They ignored Trump's words entirely, focusing instead on the optics of a black woman who refused to shrink. Meanwhile, in her office, Jasmine met with her staff. They were gathered around a round table, not strategizing for social media, but for committee policy. She stood at the head, pointing at a draft proposal for increased transparency in defense contracts. "I want this airtight," she said. "We cannot ask for accountability and then hand them loopholes." Kiera leaned in. "The press wants another quote." Crockett didn't blink. "Then quote this: policy is louder than any insult." While most of America was dissecting a viral soundbite, Jasmine Crockett was stitching together lines of legislative precision. But outside those office walls, her influence was swelling. A high school principal in Detroit played her response during a school assembly on leadership. A book club in Atlanta rewrote their discussion agenda to focus on her quote. A mural went up overnight in Oakland, Crockett mid-sentence, eyes locked, captioned with, "Your place is wherever truth is needed." In the press gallery, a CNN producer whispered to her host, "This feels like a turning point." But not everyone was cheering. In conservative strongholds, Trump's defenders launched a full-blown counteroffensive. Editorials claimed the comment was misinterpreted, that Crockett was looking for a fight. On cable panels, pundits accused her of using identity politics. But the noise could not drown the clarity of her reply. That composure, that restraint, had echoed louder than any insult Trump hurled. A few miles from the Capitol, Crockett's mother watched a rerun of the hearing. Her hand rested lightly on a Bible in her lap. She held her peace, she whispered. And that moved mountains. Later that evening, during a closed-door session, Representative Camden, usually a fence-sitter, made a rare statement. "I may not always agree with the Congresswoman, but we owe her respect for how she held this chamber to its standards. That is leadership." The silence after his words said it all. By the weekend, Crockett was the most requested guest on political programming. She turned down nearly all of them. Instead, she chose to appear on a little-known community radio station in Fort Worth. When asked why, she said, Because policy does not start on prime time. It starts in places like this with people listening, not just watching. But despite her low media presence, the response kept building. Marches formed, centered not around outrage but around the idea of being heard. College students printed zines about the moment. Public school teachers created lesson plans on public speaking and integrity using her response as the example. And in homes all across America, girls were watching. Girls who had been told to lower their voice. Girls who had been dismissed, diminished, or called girl, in rooms where they held expertise. Girls who now saw what it looked like to reply without trembling. In New Jersey, a middle schooler named Alina read Crockett's quote aloud during a class debate. Her teacher sent it to the Congresswoman's office with a note. Your voice gave her hers. At the Capitol, a resolution began circulating quietly, a bipartisan motion to re-examine witness conduct rules during committee hearings. It did not name Trump. It did not need to. The message was clear. What happened could not happen again. And through all of it, Crockett kept working. One bill after another. One committee after another. Her questions sharp. Her tone even. Her eyes steady. Because to her, this was not a moment. It was a movement. And she was not here to perform in it. She was here to build it. The day after the clip reached 10 million views, something unexpected happened. Not online but inside the chamber. Representative Crockett entered the Oversight Committee room to attend a sub-hearing on government surveillance. No fanfare, no entourage, just a slim folder in her hand and a look that said she had work to do. But the room was different now. Staffers stood when she entered. Even some of her opponents nodded silently. Power had shifted, not through volume but through gravity. At her desk, she opened her folder and whispered something to her aide. They had 3 questions prepared for the hearing, but overnight, new documents had landed on her desk. Ones that connected a few troubling dots between past intelligence funding and private contracts linked to Trump-affiliated firms. It was not a bombshell. Not yet. But it was a fuse. Halfway through the session, she asked to yield time. The chairman gave a slight nod. She leaned forward, her voice steady. Mr. Chairman, I have reviewed newly submitted records related to surveillance contracting during the 2018 fiscal cycle. And I would like clarification on how these were approved under the current legal framework. Heads turned. Phones came out. Across the room, Representative Neil Camden adjusted his glasses. He had chaired the Intelligence Subcommittee back then. He recognized the file number she referenced. He looked nervous. Crockett continued. This contract, she said, tapping the document, lists an offshore consultancy with no American licensing. Yet it received $2.4 million in taxpayer funds to run domestic data audits. Who authorized that? No one answered immediately. But the silence did. Trump's allies knew where this was going. Her previous moment had been spontaneous. This one was calculated. Crockett was no longer a headline. She was a highlighter, dragging bright yellow across institutional rot. In a group chat among senior GOP aides, one message blinked red. She's threading it together. Kill the spotlight. But it was too late. C-SPAN was streaming. TikTokers were clipping it. Political strategists were already building talking points. Meanwhile, Crockett sat back down, adjusted her folder, and whispered to her aide, pull the 2019 records too. Let's see how deep it runs. Outside the chamber, Kiera was pacing again. People think you peaked with the Trump moment, she said later in the hallway. Crockett smiled. Peaking is for fireworks. I'm building a fire. Meanwhile, at Mar-a-Lago, Trump sat with 3 senior advisors and a flat screen showing Jasmine's latest clip on repeat. Get me something to hit her with, he barked. I don't care what. I'm not letting her set the tone. His comms team floated a plan. Leak a photo from Crockett's college years, spin a false story about campaign donations, distract and divide. But internally, even they admitted, she was clean. No skeletons. No scandal. Just skill, one strategist said. And that's dangerous. In Atlanta, a law professor updated her curriculum to include Crockett's exchanges as a case study in rhetorical power. In Detroit, a student government added a Crockett clause to their bylaws, a pledge to maintain dignity in debate. Even in unexpected corners, rural Iowa, suburban Colorado, viewers were tuning in not for drama but for clarity. And then came the hearing's intermission. Crockett walked into the hallway for a breather. A reporter stepped forward. Congresswoman, did you come today expecting to make waves again? She looked him dead in the eye. No. I came to read a contract. Back in the chamber, the hearing resumed. But the tone had changed. Representatives watched their words more closely. Questions were framed with care. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Respect, once demanded, was now being offered. And Jasmine Crockett? She was not chasing the spotlight. She was chasing the facts. That is what made her dangerous. Because when someone cannot be baited, bought, or silenced, when they just keep digging, keep questioning, keep showing up, it unsettles people used to noise, not substance. That afternoon, her questioning led to the release of previously redacted oversight records. By nightfall, 2 watchdog groups had opened new inquiries. And still, Crockett said nothing publicly. She went home, reheated leftovers, and returned every message from her constituents before midnight. No tweet. No post. Just results. The story was writing itself, and the country was finally paying attention. The morning after Jasmine Crockett's quiet takedown of the surveillance contract scandal, 2 major national papers led with the same image. Her finger resting lightly on a single paragraph in the document, her expression composed but cutting. No dramatic gestures. No firebrand rhetoric. Just one line underlined in red: unauthorized disbursement to foreign consultancy, $2.4 million. But inside the Capitol, the storm was just beginning. At 9:03 a.m., the Office of Congressional Ethics received a formal request to initiate a review of all surveillance-related contracts from 2018 to 2020. The sender was anonymous, but the attachments were not. They matched the ones Crockett had presented. That same hour, C-SPAN's replay of the hearing hit 2 million views. People were not watching for entertainment. They were watching for accountability. Trump's team, meanwhile, was in scramble mode. At Mar-a-Lago, his aides cycled through damage control scripts. "She's pushing old paperwork," one muttered. "We can spin this." But the former president was not listening. He was watching the hearing again, his jaw clenched. "Why does she sound like a prosecutor every damn time?" he said aloud. No one responded. By noon, Crockett had already sent another internal memo to the oversight chair's office. This time, it included links between the offshore consultancy and a shell company registered in Cyprus, whose records included indirect payments to a lobbying firm tied to Trump's 2016 transition team. Again, she made no statement. But by 2:15 p.m., a popular political podcast dropped a bonus episode, The Crockett Effect, Quiet Power and the New Face of Oversight. It quickly topped the charts. Back on Capitol Hill, tensions were rising. GOP leadership began privately urging members to pivot attention toward immigration reform, hoping to shift the news cycle. It did not work. At 4:37 p.m., Representative Neil Camden requested a closed-door meeting with the oversight chair. He wanted to clarify his role in approving the original contracts, before Crockett got to him publicly. Inside his office, Camden's staff argued about whether to go public or lie low. But Crockett had not accused anyone by name. Not yet. She just kept highlighting the facts and letting others panic. Kiera, back in Crockett's office, was managing an avalanche of press requests. "CBS wants you tomorrow. So does CNN. There's a late-night pitch too." "No," Crockett replied, eyes on a spreadsheet. "Not yet. Let them talk. I'll keep working." Down the hall, a freshman representative whispered to a colleague, "I used to think she got lucky with that Trump moment. Now I think she's the most dangerous woman in the building." And he was right. Because while others were chasing narratives, Jasmine was building one. That evening, while networks argued over whether this would lead to real accountability, Crockett was on a Zoom call with a policy analyst in Maryland, verifying citations from a 2019 oversight brief. She logged off just after 9 p.m., made a single phone call to a whistleblower listed only as C. Fisher, and then turned off her light. No press. No noise. Just quiet momentum. The next morning, the headlines were brutal for Trump. New oversight files linked Trump firms to offshore contracts. Crockett, the watchdog Congress didn't know it needed. Trump's spokesperson went live at 11 a.m. with a denial. "This is nothing more than a partisan witch hunt led by someone addicted to TV time." But that only made things worse. Within the hour, Crockett's committee posted an official response. It was just a copy of the original contract, with 3 lines highlighted in yellow and 1 sentence at the top. "This isn't about airtime. It's about where your money went." Twitter exploded. Late that afternoon, Crockett stood in front of a group of high school students visiting the Capitol. She did not mention Trump. She did not mention the contracts. She simply said, "Accountability does not. Accountability does not require anger. It requires evidence, and patience, and a spine." One teacher later tweeted, "Every girl in my class leaned in when she spoke. And not because she was loud, but because she was certain." By the end of the week, a quiet revolution had begun, not with protests or speeches but with Crockett's folders, her files, her questions. And just beneath the surface something was cracking. The truth, after all, does not need to shout. It just needs to show up, again and again, until silence is no longer an option. By Monday morning, a subtle but significant shift had taken root across Washington. The Oversight Committee was no longer just a venue, it was the epicenter. Representatives who once shrugged off Jasmine Crockett's methodical inquiries were now rehearsing their own questioning styles. Staffers scrambled to fact-check memos twice before delivery. It was no longer just about what you said, it was how airtight your evidence was. Crockett had changed the tempo. The chair's office added 2 new staffers just to handle document intake related to Crockett's requests. Journalists began calling her folders the Crockett files, a nod to how each one arrived at hearings, color-coded, tabbed, precise. Even House Speaker Emory Daniels, who rarely commented on committee matters, made a passing reference to a new culture of diligence taking root, without naming her, of course. But Trump's circle was spiraling. That morning, the Washington Gazette published a damning follow-up. Several of the overseas payments Crockett had flagged were connected to dormant firms tied to construction bids during the early Trump years, contracts long buried under stacks of bureaucracy. At 10:42 a.m., an internal GOP memo circulated urging members to discredit the hearings as grandstanding. But some members refused. One senator, speaking off record, said, "If she's grandstanding, she's doing it with footnotes." Back at Mar-a-Lago, Trump erupted during a donor brunch. "I've been investigated 100 times. This is different. This is surgical," he snapped, slamming down his coffee. By early afternoon, an anonymous leak hit the Hill. Screenshots of email correspondence between a Trump-affiliated legal consultant and a shell company now under scrutiny. The emails had timestamps. And worse, they referenced Jasmine Crockett by name. Kiera's phone rang. "We need eyes on this," she said, forwarding the documents. Crockett opened them silently, then nodded once. "Start the chain. We draft an inquiry at 4 p.m. But before she could even begin, something unexpected happened. CNN broke live coverage of a campaign event to air a special report, Inside the Contracts, the new oversight frontline. Crockett's segment ran for 7 minutes. Not one word from her. Just documents. Highlights. Names. Dates. And viewers could not look away. An anchor summed it up: "We are not watching a political takedown. We are watching a legal reckoning." At 3:58 p.m., a Republican strategist tweeted, "This is no longer about Trump versus Crockett. This is about who controls the definition of accountability in 2025. 2 hours later, Crockett stood at a town hall in Garland, Texas, answering questions from constituents. "How do you stay calm?" a teenager asked. Crockett smiled. "Because I do not speak to provoke. I speak to document." That line went viral. By the end of the week, the House Oversight Committee had officially scheduled a new round of closed-door interviews. 3 subpoenas had been filed. And Jasmine Crockett? She had already drafted the next file. The truth, after all, is not a moment. It is a process. And she was just getting started.